Well, okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome to program number 5 in the Six Stages of Discipleship, which are um, writings that are in Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1, at the end. Now, it's been a few days since we've been able to do this, but it's really an important subject, and it helps us be realistic about where we truly stand in our work uh, to help the great ones with the upliftment of humanity. So, well, I don't know if a segue is needed, um, but some of these questions that we just have looked at, um, this paragraph is important. I'm going to repeat it. The task of the master is to evoke from his disciples such a depth of consecrated love, such a realization of today's opportunity, that the personality aspect of their lives will fade out in their consciousness. You know, we're pretty far from that when it comes to the mass of humanity, of course, but for disciples, it's really important. And their main preoccupation will be, and as I read these questions again, see if it is your preoccupation. What must be my service at this time? What are the non-essential things in my life to which I should pay no attention? So many of us seem to hang on to those, you know. What is the task to be done? Really done for this phase of the plan to be manifested? Who are the people I can help? That's really important. It doesn't do a lot of good to try to go helping those who should be helping us, except in the sense that we can serve them and be agents for them. But we have to have something to give, don't we? And we have to know to whom we can give it. Which aspects of the Master's work should I endeavor to give the most help at this time? Because it can't be all. None of us can cover the planet in that way. He tells us about those, I think, who have a lot of third ray, uh, who try to be everywhere and do everything. And the result is that nothing of real accomplishment happens. These questions must all meet with a balanced, intelligent, and non-fanatical response and answer. No, I don't think I can pull that curtain. So then we go on page 693. In considering this whole subject of discipleship, this is part 3, section 3 of the book. In considering this whole subject of discipleship, there are certain things of which I would like to remind you. If you will reflect upon them, you will find that they may change somewhat your idea of what constitutes discipleship, but they will also enrich your general concept anent this subject. So, DK is bringing forward, and it's probably 85 years ago here, what the new discipleship is all about. And if we stick with our old fixations about discipleship, we will miss the opportunity. The first point, and usually what I do there, is try to make it really so I can get back to it and notice it, The first point, which I would like to bring out, is that accepted disciples are in training for initiation. He has said, that all true disciples are in training for initiation, and here, I guess, a true disciple in his eyes is an accepted disciple. So all accepted disciples, this occurring somewhere most often between the middle of the period between the first and second initiation and the second initiation, maybe sometimes afterwards. Accepted disciples are in training for initiation. If, when they approach the path of discipleship, they fail to grasp this fact and to give the fullest cooperation, they postpone the time of that initiation. So we are not to be overly anxious about the occult receiving what's been called the occult accolade, but the accolade of various fires, but at the same time we have to be vigilant and attentive and cooperative. Their grasp of the fact will be demonstrated in the intensity of their proffered service. Because a true accepted disciple is committed to service. The true accepted disciple has taken an hopefully irrevocable pledge as a pledged disciple before being accepted. So, ask yourself, what is the intensity of the service I'm offering? And is that adequate? Planned service is one of the modes of the training. Disciples in the early stages of their work are apt to be primarily interested in themselves and in their own reactions and attitudes to the master. The fact that they are working in a master's group seems to them to be of paramount importance, but service is more important. More important sometimes, he says, even than meditation, if you can believe that. That's quite an idea, that you can accomplish more through certain types of service than you can even through meditation. I guess he's trying to really make a point that we have to be a person for others. Even though in a metaphysical sense, in the one soul and the one being, there are no others. So we'll have to gauge the degree of our cooperation with the Master and the intensity of our service and the point of tension at which we live and try to live. And whether we can take our eyes off our personal self. He tells us that some disciples are thinking only about themselves. They can't quite manage to take their eyes off the personal self, and that, of course, prevents the angel from doing its work. The heart will, when activated, will remove the eyes from the personal self and will fix those eyes upon the needs of others. Now, the second thing, I guess I'm going to do it the same way, as I have. Done it here. The second thing which I would like to point out is that there is a great difference between a master's group and his ashram. This is seldom realized. So the groups that were gathered into these groups of 9, they were master's groups, and they were on the periphery of his ashram, shall we say. Now, sometimes the ashram is used in a broad sense, but DK is being more technical here about it. Many people can be found in a master's group, but the personnel of his ashram is picked out of that of the group. So we have to be on our mettle, if we want to serve in a way still more effectively. In a group, the master is in touch with and aware of the aspiring disciple, and he has had a definite contact with him. The disciple has had a definite contact with the master, but this has involved a personality as well as a soul relation. Well, no question, DK saw and knew what was going on with the disciples he had gathered for his groups and later for some modified and enlarged groups, consolidated groups. But in an ashram, only that is to be found within the sphere of influence of an ashram which is of the soul. That's a big statement. Nothing of the personality is allowed to enter in. Personality reactions, disabilities, limitations, personality thoughts, and all that is material, because the personality is material, and connected with the lower nature, never reaches the ashram at all. So that's quite a couple of sentences there. And we really have to take it take it in. All of our various liabilities, and the kinds of things which block us from successful invocation and evocation, they don't get into the ashram. And he uses the words at all. Maybe there are some guardians who have to make sure that some of these things do not reach the ashram and have to shut the disciple off when he or she is subject to these states which are not harmonious with the general tenor of the ashram, the general vibration. In the early stages, therefore, of a disciple's work, it is possible that there is little or nothing that the disciple will be able to contribute of any kind for a long time. So, making the grade is the key here, and really having something worthwhile to offer and working upon making sure that those values that can be offered are cultivated. Otherwise, of what use are we, really? And then he tells us what gets in a way, into the ashram. Only those positively sensed intuitions and those definite soul impressions and impulses which the disciple may succeed in evoking through meditation and growing purity of intention can contribute anything to the life of the ashram. So let's be humble about it, and as we question ourselves, really look to see whether there is aught occurring in our lives that actually is a contribution to the ashram. The positively sensed intuitions, definite soul impressions, and impulses that have been successfully evoked can contribute something to the livingness, the value, the enhancement of the ashram. There is consequently a law which protects the ashram from your limitations. That's a good thing too, isn't it? Because I'm sure we all have many of those moments when that which is not worthy does make its way into our consciousness. And then we have to apply ourselves, as in white magic, and those 15 counsels beginning on page 473 to cast out this, cast out that, all fear, all hate, all greed, all worry, all suspicion, all self-pity, all destructive criticism. I have been using the word ashram, he says, quite definitely in my effort to lead you to discriminate between a group and an ashram. An ashram is basically formed of those who, through their knowledge, devotion, and service, have worked their way out of a group into an inner center where the master's energy, wisdom, and effort is more easily available. And through the intensity of our service and through our study and through the depth of our meditation, obviously, it's quite a natural process to gradually work oneself into a more intimate relationship with the master and the major node of the ashram. It's not that we have to be ambitious to do that, it's just that we really have to observe the precursors of entry, depth of meditation, profound study, and intensity of service, all with the right motive. In order to work their way from the group into the ashram, disciples will need most carefully to discriminate between their high-grade personality inclinations, their responses to truth and ideals, and their true soul reactions, spiritual wisdom, and intuitive perception. So even the products of the high grade personality do not enter, as good as they may be on the personality level. So is this aspiration I'm feeling, this this work I'm doing, all that, is that of a high-grade personality, somewhat influenced by the soul, or is it really soul reactions, true soul reactions, spiritual wisdom, and intuitive perception? What does he say? Spiritual instinct is found in relation to the first initiation, but intuitive instinct in relation to the third. And maybe the wisdom begins to gather, after the first degree. And we have kind of an enhancement of the light of the mental vehicle. Most carefully to discriminate between what we normally consider to be high-grade responses and something else, which is not familiar to us unless we really do enter that world of the soul and even beyond, into the spiritual triad. So we've had a couple of things about accepted disciples and the difference between a master's group, lower intensity really, and truly a master's ashram. It's like a master's group can be consisting of those who are training their personalities, and soul-infusing personalities are included in a master's group, but apparently not in his ashram. Now, what is the third point he's wanting to make here? You can see that when DK wrote these letters, how very important it was to read and reread and reread and absorb what he had been giving. Because these things do not necessarily sink in so easily. And once they are understood, there is the effort made to apply, which takes considerable labor. So the third point, which I would like to bring out, is that disciples, when they form part of an ashram, are subjecting themselves to a greatly increased pressure and are in a position to participate in a much wider distribution of energy than heretofore. Greatly increased pressure. Well, maybe some who feel that they have actually entered the ashram feel that pressure. Perhaps. But of course, I think, to be a member of a peripheral group is a more realistic expectation of the stage of ashramic affiliation, which is possible to most of us in our groups. Today, as the coming one nears the earth, that is the outer physical plane, really, because of course the coming one is already here on the cosmic physical plane, and in those vehicles of the earth globe, which are subtle. But today, as the coming one nears the earth and draws closer to humanity, and as the inflow of spiritual energy from Shambhala into the hierarchical center becomes greater, there is a great keying up of human receptivity, and a greatly augmented stimulation is taking place with varying effects. And this involves an intensified aspiration and spiritual determination. It is an aspect of the will, not the full will as he would describe divine will, but spiritual determination is. It also signifies an opportunity of an unprecedented nature. So all of these movements from on high are offering finally humanity a great opportunity to move forward. And so the times, in many ways, are unique. The whole Aquarian age here will be a unique opportunity. It will be a double Aquarian age. Whenever that great Platonic year under Aquarius begins, the first part of it will have the lesser equinoctial age of Aquarius occurring simultaneously. So a double Aquarian influence will occur. And there are some cycles that say, well, maybe is this the seventh time in the Aryan root race that Aquarius has occurred in the equinoctial cycle accompanied by the seventh ray. So it's a real time for seventh ray externalization, Aquarius hierarchy. It's climactic. You have been told that when the Buddha came and worked on earth, that is on the outer plane, many aspirants entered the ranks of accepted disciples, and many disciples took one or other of the major initiations. And we have to remember the Buddha was surrounded by arhats as his students, but also others of lesser degree. I have the sense that, I can't be sure, but that Master M was associated with the Emperor Ashoka, who became a great Buddhist emperor and was attentive to the Buddha at that time. So this was a period of ingathering and of radiation, an important one, and not necessarily the largest one, but really significant in terms of the expression of those who, like the Buddha, were functioning monadically on the third ray. There was, therefore, a definite shift of the personnel of the hierarchy because of the ingathering, right? Oh, start in the right place. And a great expansion toward Shambhala, where the Buddha, now we are told, resides, and at the same time towards humanity, always a double movement, above and below. Again, a double movement. So this is these periods of radiation are being noted here. And I think we will see that there are three, or with one coming. So this has to do with the Lord of Wisdom and the Lord of Light. This, he can be called, the Buddha can be called either one. And this is not the Prince Siddhartha, just as Christ was not Jesus, or the Lord Maitreya was not Jesus. It's a particular way of working together, which I think has been called a kind of a tulku phenomenon. Maybe that's the Tibetan word for it. So this was a first great period of radiation, really significant for humanity, going through an upward shift under hierarchical and even shambhalic influence, and the enlightenment of the Buddha, the true Buddha, at the 6th degree, was a cosmic mental touch, and that had to have had tremendous effect on humanity as a whole, an effect which stimulated all manner of intelligence and philosophy. Now, the next ingathering or period of radiation to note is that of the Christ. When the Christ made his appearance on earth, there was a similar and still greater climaxing effort, which culminated in the inclusion of disciples in the Master's inner ashrams. So let's mark out this this work of the Christ in that color. Hitherto, ashrams had been kept for those who had taken the first initiation. And before the time of the Christ, only those who had taken the first initiation and were initiate, that's the key, formed an ashram. So it looks like by this, the third initiation is probably meant. This is a way DK can blind certain statements. But, it's obvious if the Buddha were surrounded by arhats as his students that we could go a little bit lower and begin to take in probationary initiates, perhaps, when the Christ came. And in that diagram of the planetary hierarchies, of the solar hierarchies, that's it. It's the one with all the circles, Yeah, so this is the one I'm talking about, and as you see that blue circle, at this time, even lesser disciples, even those apparently on the path of probation here, are included within this blue circle of hierarchy. So the Christ kind of democratized everything, or at least opened the door still wider. So hitherto, these ashrams had been kept for those who had taken the first initiation, and before the time of the Christ, only those who had taken the first initiation and were initiate formed the ashram. That's the hint. That's the hint right there. That they're probably talking about the third degree. And I'll put that in. This probably means the third degree. Owing, however, to the growing sensitivity of humanity, it was then decided that disciples could be admitted into the ashrams. Disciples, namely those who were probationary initiates, could be admitted into the ashrams and so be mentally and astrally en rapport with the inner group and begin to form part of the master's sphere of directed influence. And that was a very significant development. And that, of course, offered opportunity to such as we are. I want to make that, a little different. Okay. That the disciples could enter. Okay. And that gives us today's opportunity as well, doesn't it? Okay. This is the opportunity which is held out today before the aspirants and probationary disciples, that we can actually begin to form part of the Master's sphere of directed influence, can come in closer contact and greater usefulness, closer contact with the Master, and be of greater usefulness, because to be admitted to an ashram or to come very close is to expand one's sphere of usefulness and deepen it too. So this is the opportunity which is held out today before the aspirants and probationary disciples. The effort might be termed, and indeed this is what we've been talking about, is so very important, an externalization of the ashram. DK attempted that to a certain degree in New York, I'm told, with the group which met around the time of the full moon with Alice Bailey, and worked with the rays and the initiations and discussed the ashram and what the requirements would be. A kind of externalization. You had to be in presence in a way to be part of that. It was not yet the computer age. You have been told that it is the intention of the hierarchy to restore the mysteries on earth. And this externalization of the ashram is the first step towards that objective. If this embryonic externalization succeeds in functioning, and by that also I think we mean, let's see if I can get a little more light in here. Master DK's groups then, and if those participating in this new effort manage to work with unity, love, and understanding, and if this proves so strong as to withstand all disintegrating forces, then it may be possible later to increase the membership, power, and size of any ashram. And this lies entirely in the hands of the group. So, I will, it's about externalizing. Now, was that successful? Well, the project can go on another couple of 100 years. It had to do with seed group work, a 275-year project begun, let us say, around the year 1925. Every new person who is put in touch with the ashram becomes a definite responsibility. The work of integration and of absorption lies with the ashram and not with the individual. This is not easily apparent until disciples are accepted and integral parts of the ashram, so they can see what it's like when a new member is introduced. And these new members, such disciples, constitute a definite problem, definite responsibility, and definite problem. So we always have to think about what our effect on the ashram may be. And act as responsibly as we can so that our impact is a useful one, helpful one, a non-disturbing one. A certain amount of disturbance will necessarily come from us because we're just not yet used to the way things are done in an ashram. But okay, gradually there is an accommodation and an understanding. Gradually it begins to blend. The question now arises, how does a master form and organize his ashram or inner group, of which the personnel is provided from the outer group of aspirants? How does this happen? It must surely be apparent to you that a master, in forming his ashram, proceeds as automatically as does the Creator, capital C. He meditates, he visualizes, he speaks, and that which he seeks to create and to materialize in line with the hierarchical plan begins to take form. By the power of his focused and directed thought, he attracts to him those whose type of mind synchronizes with his because of karmic relationships, and point in evolution, and love for humanity. Now that's interesting, because maybe we begin to wonder how we were attracted to Master DK's group, or at least to his teaching, just the way so many of those who found themselves eventually in the outer groups that he was forming were attracted. Maybe through books, I think, to a great extent. And through continued reading of those books, and then through maybe joining the arcane school, but not in every case. In the words focus, okay, and direction lie the key to the technique or method of contributing to what I might here call the reservoir of thought, which is an ashram. Think about that definition. It's a point of tension. It's a reservoir of thought. There are many unconventional definitions of an ashram. It's not a place you go to in India and live there for a few weeks, meditating with the master of that physical externalization. I mean, in a way it can be that, but this is a more inward definition of what an ashram is. It's the state of mind of an inner spiritual group. So the words are focus and direction. And this is how the master operates. First he focuses, and then he directs his thought outward, and people are attracted. Of course, he labored so hard with Alice Bailey to make very tangible, through books, reasons for attraction. What was your response when you first encountered the blue books? Did you recognize the note that was being sounded through them? Maybe through old karmic relationships, and because the ray synchronized with that of Master DK, namely the second ray, but a lot of the third, I think. Maybe you were drawn into it for those reasons. And you had to have, I think, a sufficient point in evolution. Otherwise, you would not sustain your study. It would not be of interest to you. You would have other things to fulfill earlier in the program of your evolutionary trajectory. And of course, the note of love of humanity is sounding throughout his work, because his ashram, of the 5 that seem to be externalizing initially, is given to right human relations. Right human relations. So MDK's ashram sounds the note of right human relations. But the words focus and direction seem to be the key. It is the sustained focus plus a dynamic direction, in line with the plan, of course, as hierarchy sees it, which makes this reservoir of thought contributory to world service and creatively effective. So this is coming from the master's side and from those who have long enough experience within the ashram to do as he does. Sustained focus plus dynamic direction. And this state of mind of this inner spiritual group, this reservoir of thought, contributes as a result of focus and direction to world service, and helps to recreate on the outer plane conditions which are in line with what must be. So we're looking at, the accepted disciple's response to what is emanating from the ashram and his or her approach to the ashram according to certain qualifications, certain requirements. The important thing for an accepted disciple to grasp is what the master is seeking to accomplish through the medium of his group. Now, it's not what we want to get out of it for our spiritual progress. Our sympathy, our empathy, our sense of purpose has to accord with that of the master. And this, naturally, why would he select possible members of his ashram unless there was that accord? Why waste time with notes that were inharmonious? And that certainly, would be possible if he chose unwisely, just like any disciple out in the world choosing co-workers can choose unwisely, and maybe only later learn that the choice was not sufficiently considered. So this entails finally the inquiry in the mind of the disciple as to whether he thinks, focuses, and works along lines similar to that of the master. And have you asked yourself that? That have I. Is there harmony? Is there accord? Is there mutual reinforcement? There's 10,000 things in the world that one really doesn't want to do, that have no real appeal to one. And then every once in a while, something locks in and says, this is home. Or this is exactly the purpose which I wish to pursue. And I feel about it no friction regarding purpose. There may be friction regarding adjustment to certain standards, but that's a different thing. And all that we do learn in time. How close is the disciple to the master's thoughts? Well, we can estimate. We'll not know. The master will know, or will maybe inform us whether our thoughts are deviating. There was a disciple I think he had to inform. His strength was it BSW, something like that. First-ray soul and a seventh-ray personality, and a Masonic participant. But he had this habit of engaging in glamorous activities on the astral plane and meeting teachers and others on the astral plane, which were basically old astral shells and carried nothing in common with the direction that was being emphasized by the master. The master had to tell him that he was wasting his time. And eventually, I think, if I'm correct in remembering who stayed and who went, this particular disciple departed the group. He was either told he should and let go, or he did it himself. We have to look at the end of his instructions in discipleship. I think it's probably volume 1. BSW, I think it stood for Masonic virtues like beauty, strength, and wisdom. So there is this question of whether we are actually close to the master's thought so that there is a fit in terms of our participation. Otherwise, the law of economy is violated, energy is wasted, and probably no sustained participation is achieved. The master is prevented, it says here, by occult law from using any pressure or power in the effort to swing the minds of those whom he is influencing into unison with his. He may not impose his will upon the disciple, and I suppose that even operates for first-ray ashrams, which might come as a bit of a surprise to those upon the impositional first ray. His desires and aspirations, i.e. the master's desires and aspirations and wishes, must not be the enforced directing agency in the lives of those with whom he is in touch. He may impress their minds with what he feels is needed in periods of world crisis, especially, I suppose. Maybe there would be less of a tendency to do that if we were not in a period of world crisis. But when this was written, and to this day, we are in a period of world crisis, he, the master, can express to them what he feels should be done. But it remains for the disciple to decide and prove. Well, the responsibility is that of the disciple. It helps to know what is the apportionment of responsibility and what are the limitations of the master. Because if there were this kind of coercion, that's what it would be basically. The master would be forcing a certain acquiescence upon a disciple. Eventually, it would break down if there was no true accord between them. Disciples are in a master's group because of similarity of ideas, even though they sense and express those ideas far less clearly than he does, the master, and see the vision as through a glass darkly, as was the case, with St. Paul, as he discussed seeing now through a glass darkly, but later face to face and with total clarity. Even though they express those ideas, that is, we do, far less clearly than the master does, and see the vision as through a glass darkly. But their innate convictions are basically the same, and their task is to discover the points of contact, the analogous idealism for the group effort, and then to submerge their entire individual lives and activities in the recognized effort. Behind this effort stands the master, an initiating and distributing center of power. So these requirements tell us why disciples are in a master's group. And unless these requirements are fulfilled, then the disciple doesn't belong there. So, if some people pick up some of DK's books and put them down rapidly because there is no similarity of vibration to hold them. And what may seem so impressive, so irresistible, so wonderfully illuminative to us, strikes something of the note of indifference when people from other ray lines, let us say, pick up DK's books. I have a brilliant friend. I just know he's on a different ray than I am. And his whole work is along the third and fifth ray with a growing fourth ray. And he rejects out of hand what comes from the Tibetan. There's just no similarity of vibration, and yet a passionate entry into other ray lines of thought. So we have to know to whom we are speaking. And maybe some of us have had the experience, some of us being on the second ray and have the experience talking to sixth ray people, which is it's a complementary ray. But so often there is an immediate rejection of the wider and more considered second ray response to truth. They'd rather have something quick, certain, unchangeable, and promising many high things without the labor over time that goes with them. So as we make our way through our incarnation, to whom indeed can we speak meaningfully? Whom can we help? Really help And a lot of judiciousness is required when we come to answering that question. But, you know, this is a pretty stiff requirement to submerge our entire individual lives and activities in the recognized effort. Because indeed we, you know, when we're on the same ray, have something of the same idealism and same purpose, though much reduced in our own cases, we do recognize the Master's focus and direction. Every ashram or inner group is essentially a reservoir of thought, and that reservoir has for its springer source the ideas, dreams, vision, and aspiration of the Master. And this is impulsed by his monadic potency, which in the case of Master DK may well be the third ray, at least one of the monadic rays. You know how I hypothesize that there is a major monadic ray, one of three, on the logoic plane, and submonadic rays on the monadic plane. Somewhere, it seems, in terms of the abstract mind and the astute energy of divine mental perception, Master DK has acute energy. Did I say astute? Okay. Acute energy of divine mental perception. DK has something of the third ray, but you know, who's to say what the ultimate ray may be? And he is influenced by the one who is his master. Now, at one point, Master DK says, my master is the Christ. At another point, it seems clear that he's in the Ray Ashram of Master Kutumi, and from another perspective, Master Kutumi is his master. So he's influenced by the one who is his master, and developed and fed by his experience, unfolded as his wisdom grew, and his capacity to further the hierarchical plan had been dedicated, used, and increased. So this is the master progressing. And, you know, he gets a bright idea, or maybe a complex idea, which is filled with light, and he wants to see it materialize. So that's what it means, that the ashram is a reservoir of thought. And the ideas, dreams, and vision and aspiration, note a master still has aspiration. All these of the master is the spring or source of this ashram. Just the way if we were working in our incarnation to manifest one of our projects based upon our ideas, dreams, vision, aspiration, we would gather those together who could possibly help to carry out those ideas, dreams, vision, and aspiration. So interesting, too, that the monadic potency enters in here. It's not just the soul potency, which is considered to be a subray of the monad. It's the monadic potency, which sort of impulses, is the spring or source of these ideas, dreams, and aspirations. But I think, we will have to look for the major monadic ray, which would be liberated in a way. The monad would be a liberated monad, a volatile essence which had translated itself onto the logoic plane. And, maybe for Master TK, that would be the second ray. For Christ, it just seems to be 2 and 2 and 2 all the way down. So the ashram, the thought, what is gathered of energy at a point of tension, is impulsed by monadic potency. And, one wants to emphasize that. And influenced by the one who is his master, fed by his experience, and it just grows and grows. And then it becomes, the ashram becomes a clear pool of thought, augmented and fed from the spring of many lives, from the pure vision and consecrated dreams of many disciples. They all begin to contribute in line with the master's dreams and visions and ideas and aspirations and so forth. So the potency of the ashram grows. If the master chooses wisely his co-workers and admits them wisely into greater intimacy or closeness to himself. Pure vision and consecrated dreams of many disciples performing group work together and augmenting each other, mutually supporting and mutually enhancing each other. So it can be a real powerhouse as it grows. It begins with the kind of monadic center, but ends up with many more contributors. And I'm sure that on our mind is the hope that we too can contribute. To this reservoir of pure thought, every pledged disciple is asked to make his contribution, and if he can do so, it will enable the ashram to meet the need and help every aspirant pass off the probationary path and onto the path of accepted discipleship. So it does seem that, now this is important, that since accepted discipleship occurs after the first initiation, in almost all cases. There might be one outstanding exception in the Tibetans group or groups, but since the path of accepted discipleship begins after the first initiation, the path of probation lasts also until after the first initiation, up to the point where accepted discipleship can take over. So another definition of the starting point of the path of probation. Usually, the first initiation is considered the time when when discipleship begins. But DK takes the beginning of discipleship to the point when accepted discipleship begins. There's a certain amount of fluidity in these terms, and if we try to make things too concrete or too cut and dried, we find ourselves maybe contradicted in another reference. So in a way, it is discipleship of a kind, and becoming a true aspirant that occurs at the first initiation, but probation continues in that type of discipleship. In other words, you're still a kind of probationary disciple, and you're making your pledge during that time, and only then become an accepted disciple. More likely, not sooner than midway between the first and second initiations, which can be a span constituting quite a few lives. I mean, the analogy is there, in the life of the initiate Jesus, from the birth to the year 30, he was, shall we say, going through a period that signified the first initiation, birth, and following development. After 30 years old, he entered the stream with John the Baptist, and by that time the Christ had entered his vehicle, and he had the second degree a long time after the birth. And then the next initiations followed rapidly in succession, at least for Jesus. The Christ was simply replicating them, something that he had gone through long before. And so compare the years from 1 to 30 with the years from 30 to 33, which is the supposed death age signified by the crucifixion. One quite long, and the other very short, relatively, and momentous in terms of the initiations passed through. So let us hope that in all our studies and meditations and service, that we have taken an inward pledge. We have made a promise. We really we really mean business. And we then will contribute actively. Even though a pledged disciple in this scheme is still on this post first initiation path of probation, still contributions can be made, and the greater the contribution in service and in depth of study and meditation, the sooner will the master accept the probationary initiate into real accepted discipleship. But of course, it is the initiate of the first degree who must become first the accepting disciple, then the pledged disciple, and only then the accepted disciple. Okay, trying to straighten that all out, you know. I have a colleague who gives a lot of attention to all this, and she has it maybe clearer than I do, but you'll run into her work. Every center of focus or focus of power has a definite sphere of influence, and a true active ashram is a positive force within the center we call humanity. So there are these centers of positivity and real influence, and we want to qualify ourselves for membership in such a spiritual interior enterprise. Okay. The disciple now naturally and rightly questions how thought power and spiritual instinct are related, how they can work constructively, and how their interdependence demonstrates. And he says he wonders if he can make the idea clear to us. Spiritual instinct, first initiation. Then mental focus, strong stimulation of the throat center, a spiritual mentality, the second initiation, and intuitive instinct, as opposed to spiritual instinct, ruling the third initiation. So DK wants to make this idea clear to us, the relationship between thought power and spiritual instinct. You know, before we even get into what the Tibetan has said, it's obvious that our thought power will depend to a certain extent on being able meditatively to hold the mind within the light of the soul, toward which our spiritual instinct leads us. We are led into the light of the soul by spiritual instinct. Of course, there's a steady climbing that goes on through the millions of years of human development, but at a certain point, a spiritual instinct really emerges and illuminates, because it puts us en rapport with the soul. It illuminates the mental plane, and hence the increasing thought power. I wonder, he says, how I can make the idea clear to you. Let me first call your attention to the fact that it is instinct which leads a disciple to respond to a master's call or note, to his vibration, and to his group. I wonder, when we first picked up the blue books and were attracted by them, was it this kind of instinct which was at work, something within us that operated rather unconsciously and impelled us towards a closer rapport with some higher point of tension, impelled us to respond to a certain note or invocation that the master was sending forth. Instinct in its early stages is the name given to the response of the material mechanism to its environing world, and which are the three worlds of human evolution. Later, upon the evolutionary ladder, the mind appears as an interpreting agency, and the nature of the mechanism and of the environment is slowly understood. The relationships become clarified. Now, this is just instinct in the early stages. But now he'll discriminate spiritual instinct. So, spiritual instinct is the capacity of the soul to register contact with the hierarchy. Now, we might say the soul, or maybe in this case, the soul in incarnation, to register contact with the hierarchy of which the soul is inherently a part. He may be using this term soul in two ways here. Just as in the body, a man's mechanical, instinctual responses, reactions, and reflexes are an integral part of the material mechanism. In the case of the spiritual instincts, it is the intuition which interprets and illumines the mind. That is, if spiritual instinct becomes intuitive, The power of thought, as employed in the work of the ashram, is dependent upon the power of the disciple to focus and raise the conscious mind to contact the soul. Yes. In other words, thought power is increased with soul contact and evoke the intuition. So let me put that down. Thought power is increased through soul contact and contact with the intuition. So because of the soul and because of that contact, our thought power is increased, and that's why we disciples have to be really careful about our use of thought power, because it has been augmented in power through soul contact, and we are sometimes capable of holding the mind steady in the light of the soul. And for good or for ill, our thoughts can be very effective in the world. So we have to be careful what we think and what we say about our thinking. So this is where the power of thought employed in ashramic work comes into the picture. Augmented through soul contact and intuition. And when that has been successfully done, then comes the unison of all the three factors. Mental illumination. Yes, that's one of the particular qualities of the second degree. Soul impulse and intuitive perception. This triple combination will produce that type of thought which will be effective in activity, productive of the plan, and conducive to selflessness and motivated by love. So the unison of three factors, when there has been the soul in contact with the lower mind, mental illumination, soul impulse, and intuitive perception, which is really a very high thing. So we're looking here for sorry. Yeah, we're looking for a triple combination. A triple combination. And it will produce a particular type of thought, which will be effective in activity, productive of the plan, and conducive to selflessness and motivated by love. And spiritual instinct gets us into that kind of contact, which will make this type of thought possible. Is this the type of thought that we evidence. Hopefully. And that we will not be so fixated on our own personal self that will be a point of egotistical concentration, because then none of this will be possible. But contact with the soul should produce that type of thought by means of which the soul purposes come forward and should reduce the tendency to fixate upon the personality. We're talking about thought power here. And for the accepted disciple, the master's potency, the ashram's potency, the increased potency of the soul as it affects the mental plane will certainly affect positively the potency of thought. According to the ability of the group as a whole to function under the impetus of the spiritual instinct, it's probably, in a way, the monad within us on all levels that drives us forward on the path of return. I've often commented that the monad is the monad, the triad is the monad, the egoic lotus causal body soul is the monad, the personality is the monad. The monad is the all-inclusive factor. So according to the ability of the group as a whole to function under the impetus of the spiritual instinct will be the success of the master to carry out his plans through the medium of the group. Well, DK, it's up to him to assess what was success and non-success. He seemed to say that what he offered was certainly used advantageously by individuals within the group, but the group process and projects which he hoped to see eventuate did not yet materialize. Though I have to say, the seed group project is he tells us, a 275-year project. Now, under divine law, he, the master, may not work alone. He cannot work alone. He can inspire, teach, ask for cooperation, and give guidance as to the needed work. Beyond that, no master may go. And again, I repeat, does it seem that this would be the case for a first-ray master? And somehow Master DK is saying that, yes, it is still the case. Now, I know that there are first-rate individuals who order and command others to do certain things, and they had better obey, or in the military, they may be rapidly demoted or lose their lives. But a master of the first ray has necessarily a different approach. And Master DK is giving it to us, so it's really up to us. We may not infringe upon the divine law. And since the soul is group conscious, the master has to spread his influence. He cannot work alone, but gather those that he can inspire and teach, those from whom he can ask for cooperation and to whom he can give guidance as to the needed work, which is exactly what Master DK has been doing. In this world cycle, the work of the hierarchy is conditioned by the disciples. And they can well understand, therefore, this is a little bit of DK humor, why the last fetter cast off by a master is irritation. Well, you know, if it wasn't so true and obstructive, you'd have to laugh, because for all of our vaunted efforts at cooperation, I think we fall quite short. And at one point, Master GK actually does talk about the stupidity of the average aspirant. So it's a bit like rulership in astrology. If Mars rules Aries, Mars places a conditioning, reductive effect upon the constellational energy of Aries, which it channels to a degree, but only to a degree. And the disciples place a conditioning and reductive effect upon the energy of the master, which the disciple is supposed to channel, but only to a degree. They can well understand, therefore, why the last fetter cast off by a master is even a master still casting off fetters, I suppose, why that last fetter is irritation. No initiate can form a true ashram, and it sometimes happens at the fourth degree, until all capacity to misunderstand, to express irritation, and to criticize has vanished. That's a big wow to me. And it's an important one when we consider our relations with each other, we students and disciples of esotericism. I'll read it again. No initiate can form a true ashram. Well, we may get people together, you know, and say, well, here's this property, come here, this is an ashram. But it's a different thing. The state of mind of a spiritual group, a certain point of tension, a reservoir of thought, a particular sustained vibration with regard to receptivity and power of expression. No initiate can form a true ashram until all capacity to misunderstand, because usually something from the listeners in the way, you know, to express irritation and to criticize has vanished. The power of thought of a master, if misused, could be a potent destructive force. It reminds me of the story about Pythagoras and a student that he upbraided, probably in more than thought, probably in word. And the student, and Pythagoras at the time was not a master yet. He was, I'm sure, at least an initiate of the third degree. And the student went out and took his or her own life. I don't know whether it was a man or a woman. And that taught, we are told, the future Master Kutumi a great lesson about about the power of thought and speech and what could be said, the power of criticism, We don't get the sense when Master DK writes the letters. He says, "Dear brother," he doesn't say, "Hello, unworthy one. Well, I guess I have to write to you again, so here's what I have to say." No, he doesn't do that. "Dear brother, brother of old, my friend of ancient days," all these different forms of address. And he always finds some good to emphasize, even if he has to correct what a student is doing. He finds a way to hold his suggestions within the atmosphere of love and wisdom. So the power of thought of a master, if misused, could be a potent destructive force. He must be able to trust himself before his ashram can run on right lines and with safety. And we certainly do see many so-called masters. That word is unfortunately glibly used by those who are insufficiently informed, and they do chastise and they do berate their students, and they sometimes look with contempt upon their students. I mean, this is not what a master is. So again, we have to cast out, even now, if we can, irritation. And it's not easy to do, given the power of the astral body. Well, I think we're kind of, this is not really a new section that we're beginning, but it is an amplified section. It is a new subject. So I think maybe this would be the time to call this particular program to a close. It is a lengthy section, and I'm not going to get through it in one program by any means. So this will take us then to the end of program number 5 and the beginning of program number 6, beginning on page 698. And we'll see when we can begin this. Shortly, hopefully. I don't like too many days to elapse between working on this very important section on discipleship. We have to understand it, don't we? If we're going to participate as real disciples and not be victims of unrealistic, wishful thinking. The Arcane School was meant to train disciples. You can be a disciple and a probationary initiate. It was not yet meant to train the true initiate, but we have to work our way there. And then it will become possible to see things from an entirely new perspective. So study it with diligence. It is a really important section of the book. And I've written a commentary on it as well. But this is for those who maybe like to walk around and listen to something, or, prefer the more spontaneous video type of commentary. And others of my colleagues are working on the personal instructions to the various disciples, rectifying their charts to the best of their ability and trying to correlate those charts with what DK has said of their spiritual progress through the letters that he has written them. Master DK will be, it's almost certain, one of the externalizing masters, and probably a number of us will have association with him at future times, right here on the physical plane. So we are in a mode of preparation at this time, and we continue accordingly. So just then, wishing you lots of love and many blessings, and as full a use of this material as you can manage, because it is a great treasure. I'm not talking about my commentaries. I'm talking about Master DK's words, but hopefully there will be a few points that I raise that will help to connect with other points and thus bring a degree of illumination and will move us towards the first phase of pure reason within the abstract mind, and eventually into that intuitive instinct, where the pure reason of the intuition speaks as straight knowledge. Okay, well, so we'll see you before long. Bye-bye for now.